Hello, BookTube. I've got some mail for you today on a slightly overcast Wednesday. Uh, Clouds are moving in. They're not very heavy. They're not very ominous. I don't quite know what to make of that. On the radar, there's a fairly large mass of rain that looks to me, when I look at the Doppler radar, it looks to me like it's going to hit Boston squarely sometime tonight. That fact is not reflected in any weather forecast that I have looked at. None of them are calling for any precipitation at all, much less a lot of it. So I guess I'm wrong about that. I guess that storm is just going to go somewhere else, maybe the Poconos. But it's been an exhilarating day, even so. A cloudy, low deck of clouds notwithstanding. It's been an exhilarating day. Yesterday I had the exhilaration of organization, where I organized a whole bunch of miscellaneous crap that was just waiting around. No one else is going to do it. I had to do it. And that felt so good. I don't know if you've experienced this, but that felt so good that I started to do a little more of it. Branching out into other things that needed a little bit of cleaning up, a little bit of organizing, a little bit of work. So that is, I mean, partially I was enjoying that because it felt like a virtuous way to avoid a deadline that I didn't want to do. But also it has a virtue of its own. It felt legitimately great on its own. And today has also been marked by some exhilarations. So the week's off to a fine start, is what I'm trying to say. And there's mail. Only 2 packages this time around, and plenty of periodicals. So we'll go over both. Since you're trapped in my monologues anyway, you might as well go over my periodical mail as well. Starting with the Bedford Times Press in Bedford, Iowa. There's a bunch of veterans who receive quilts of valor. I have never received a quilt of valor in Taylor County, but that's okay. It's only a matter of time. And this is a small town Iowa newspaper. It's just one press, maybe what is this? Yeah, it's 2 full sheets of paper, maybe 4 or maybe 6. But it's all local news, local obituaries, local reports of one kind or another, except for one thing. There's one thing. As soon as you open the Bedford Times Press, the first thing that you see is me. You see me in a cartoon icon there that I've been using for well over a decade. A book column that I run, the Bedford Times Press is kind enough to run every week on all kinds of bookish subjects, very much not local stuff. This is not a column about local Iowa bookish dealings. This is my thoughts on books per week, and you can get it at the Bedford Times Press. If you go to their website, you can subscribe to the Bedford Times Press, and that will give you access to this column every week. And of course, if you decide to do that, and you don't live in Taylor County, then you will be deciding to do that solely on the basis of my column, which I admit is worth it. But if you are doing that, if you are subscribing to the Bedford Times Press or the Lennox Timetable or anywhere else where this column appears, if you are subscribing solely for this column, kindly do me a favor and let the newspaper know that. I think I'm on pretty good standing with everywhere that runs my work at the moment. I don't think any of those standings are in any way tenuous, but it never hurts. It never hurts a battered old Bailey hack if their editor has heard from a reader. This is the reason why I'm dropping my money on your newspaper, because of this column. Everything else is gravy, but I'm doing it for this. That always helps, so feel free. That's reminder number 1. And reminder number 2, when it comes to my column in the Bedford Times Press, is it could be in your local newspaper as well. My rates are very reasonable. As Sherlock Holmes would say, my rates are reasonable. When on the occasion when I do not waive them entirely. Feel free, if you go to church or book group or whatever with the editor of your local newspaper, feel free to have them get in touch with me or have them get in touch with my editor at the Bedford Times Press. It would be a delight for my column to appear in your paper. I finally give you a reason to even look at that rag. But what have we got this time around? How does this one start? Recently on social media, a bookish person asked a tongue-in-cheek question. What should you do when you're asked to blurb a book, but you're not really enthusiastic about the book? Do you give it a pass, or do you find something, anything, to praise for your blurb? It was a question asked partly in jest, but it's had me thinking ever since. just to clarify, there are blurbs and there are blurbs. Once again, we're talking about two very different things that sometimes look the same and go by the same name. And then I explain the two different kinds of blurbs and natter on about what it's like to be blurbed and what that means, what kind of responsibility you have to your readers when you do that. And that kind of a column, those kinds of bookish reflections from a book veteran are in the Bedford Times Press every week. Now, you don't have to envy the citizens of Taylor County. You can simply subscribe, and then it will be at your doorstep every week. Then the next periodical, also a familiar Steve haunt. This is the Martha's Vineyard Gazette, old-style broadsheet newspaper, the island of Martha's Vineyard off the coast of Massachusetts, that has become over time a vacation mecca, which means that the population sextuples or more, octuples, during the summer season, in between Labor Day and Memorial Day. It gigantically increases, goes from, I don't know the exact numbers off the top of my head. The numbers that I have off the top of my head are very outdated from when I had much more intimate congress with the Vineyard. The numbers I had then were that the island population went from 20,000 to 250,000. I'm pretty sure that both those numbers have gone up. But once you start getting an endless line of cars getting on to the ferry, once the summer homes start opening up again and all of the vacancy signs start getting taken out of windows, then the book traffic at the Vineyard Gazette starts to go up. In the off season, everything slows down, including how many book reviews I get in the Vineyard Gazette. But once the season starts, I will be more prominent in the paper. I'm not in this issue, for instance. There's lots of great stuff in here, but I'm not in here. But you've seen on this channel that I've started to get more reviews, more books for review sent from my Gazette editor. That is great. The Vineyard Gazette, much like the Bedford Times Press, it is a local paper. It deals only with local things. It doesn't, and how the greater world affects the island, but not anything else. There is no news section about anything that isn't Vineyard news, and all of the books are Vineyard connected somehow, which is a legitimate decision. If you're a book section editor, you have that a legitimate decision to make, depending on whether or not your editor-in-chief will let you. If your editor-in-chief says this is a local book section, then they'll hire accordingly, and you'll know that when you take the job. But if you get to run your book section, then you have a choice. Do you make it local in order to throw light on only local things? It's amazing how many big remaining print newspaper book sections do that. It's amazing to me how many do that, where you'll have a big, 150, 200,000 circulation paper in St. Louis or Florida or Oregon, and the book's editor just comes out and says, we only review books that are connected with this area. I am myself a book section editor for a print newspaper in Georgia, and I take the other philosophy. There's only one other philosophy on offer, and that's that there is no such thing as a local reader, and that a local book section only highlights the kind of cloistered provinciality that you probably don't want to highlight, and that you shouldn't have. I don't believe in the age where everybody has a cell phone in their pocket. I don't think there are provincial readers like that. I don't think there is a local reader. I don't think that any such thing exists. So, when I was presented with a print newspaper book section, I told my editor-in-chief, this is what I want to do. Is that okay with you? I want to make a smaller version of the biggest and best newspaper book sections in the country or the world. I want to make a smaller section of that. That's what I want to do. So, where I don't talk about a Georgia book unless there's a reason to do so. Certainly not just because somebody self-published a book about their memories of growing up in rural Georgia. No. You wouldn't see that in the Washington Post. And you're not going to see it in a book section that I run, and my editor was fine with that. And both are legitimate ways to do it. That's very much, the former is very much the way my editor does it at the Gazette. As you've seen, if you've watched this channel, whenever I get a Vineyard-related book, that's slated for review. But we go from smaller papers to bigger periodicals, because I also got the New Yorker. And Boy, oh boy, New York has been a roller coaster ride in the last month or two. You remember, some of you may remember that traumatic video where I went through one piece after another in the latest New Yorker that had weird ideological biases one way or another. And then last time we saw an issue that was fairly good, but had a cover. Some staff member's little kid did a sketch for the cover. It was really bad. It was awkward. It's the type of thing you see tacked up on a refrigerator that, so-and-so did at age 4. And the parents have to act proud of it. And maybe they are proud of it, and maybe that's great. Maybe I would love to talk to the kid about what they were thinking when they made that drawing. But to be on the cover of the New Yorker, and this latest issue for April 4th just shows the roller coaster ride because this cover is beautiful. Look at that. If I'm going to praise it, I should tell you. This is by Mark Ulrichsen, and it's called Stellar Night. And the New Yorkers, in the best New Yorker covers, there's always a sort of a tongue-in-cheek implication involved in the title or the focus of the cover. And here, Stellar Night, in addition to whatever the yellow and blues may say about Ukraine, the Stellar Night refers to the fact that when you live in New York City, which is clearly what this is, the stars are the buildings. There are no stars on this cover. The Stellar Night here is the buildings that rise up all around you and form the lightscape of your surroundings. But lovely that there's a couple there. Lovely that there's the greenery of the park, and that the background is this enormous wall of skyscrapers. Just a classic New Yorker cover. Unfortunately, not all of the contents were equally calming. There's one thing in particular that I wanted to read to you, because it's Sunil Kilnani, a reviewer named Sunil Kilnani reviews that book that we just saw, Legacy of Violence by Carolyn Elkins, about the British Empire and how it was built and maintained on systematic violence, and only ever operated that way, only ever produced anything like that if you were a non-white part of the British Empire that extended across a quarter of the globe. Then you were punched, kicked, beaten. Please, sir, may I have a little more? You got nothing out of that exchange whatsoever. Nothing whatsoever. There is no hint anywhere in the historical record of anyone who ever had any benefit whatsoever in any way from the British Empire, except for the top 1% of white people back in London. That's the gist of Carolyn Elkins' book. I don't think you need bat-sensitive ears to guess what I think about that premise. And at first, I thought that Sunil Kilnani was going to agree. Because at one point in the review reads like this: add to its longevity an unrivaled global footprint, and the British Empire's baneful legacy may well have been deeper and more diffuse than that of any other modern state. Was British liberal imperialism, given the extent of the damage it inflicted over generations, a more malevolent influence on world history than even Nazi fascism? And fortunately for the reviewer goes on to take a much more even-handed view about the hysterical overreactions, the hysterical alt-left overreactions of the book itself. The review is not saying that. It's not saying anything as preposterous as that the British Empire was worse than the Nazis. The review is not saying that, but the review is also making it pretty clear that the book does say that. And it's natural. It's to be expected. So it doesn't really surprise me, but I know that it's only going to get worse. I know that if there haven't been, there will be calls for reparations. There will be calls for reparations from the descendants of the countless families who were raised out of dirt-sucking poverty by the British Empire and really hate that fact. Really, how dare you? How dare you give us giant marble schools and clean waters and lavatory supplies and the access to reading and writing and the ability to pursue a literary and artistic, a theatrical or political career in London, the greatest city in the world. How dare you? I'm sure that we will get people who will be asking for reparations. Oh, I thought that was interesting, though, that the reviewer raised the specter of Godwin's Law and then moved on. And then the last periodical we'll look at before we look at the two packages is the TLS. The London Times Literary Supplement, the greatest English language review of books, And this has lots and lots of interesting stuff in it. But of course, when it comes to a book review, a major venue book review, the TLS has never bothered to entertain my work in their pages, except letters. I've had letters to the editor printed in the TLS many times over the years. But when I am looking for at any major book review like this, I'm going to be looking for the work of people whose work I know. Occasionally, names will crop up on the table of contents for the TLS who are people that I know and don't want to know, so that it spoils the whole issue. But every once in a while, I'll get a name that I know I'm going to like, and Adam Mars Jones is one of those names. And he does a piece here on the 100th anniversary of F.W. Murnau's Nosferatu, the famous movie Nosferatu. When I first saw what it was about, that the movie is screened in March of 1922, and so we're in the anniversary, my first thought was the fun that's always poked at this kind of wheezy old gimmick in the NB column of the TLS at the back of every issue. There's a column called NB, which sort of slings snark at various literary things, and the NB column for years, for decades, has been slinging snark at the fact that literary hacks like Adam Mars Jones, or myself, sometimes, will latch on to silly, stupid anniversaries in order to bloviate about something. Fortunately, I don't mostly do that anymore, thank God. But there's still plenty of people who do. This is a classic example of that, but it's really good, so you don't mind. Adam Mars Jones here writes about Nosferatu, freights it with a lot more weight than it can bear, as film buffs always do, but it's the ending of the piece that I really wanted to read you, because you read this guy, or there are a bunch of others. There's a long list of literary people in what Gore Vidal called the book chat world. There's a long list of them you read them because they know that this is not a book report. This is because they know it, and also they're lucky enough to have an editor who knows it. So the editor is going to get a piece that is technically about something, but the editor is not suddenly going to be phobic about artistic touches, flourishes of reading that go into the piece. No editor should be phobic of that, and they certainly shouldn't be phobic of that on behalf of their readers. The readers are thirsty for that kind of thing. If the editor doesn't know that, the editor should get a different job. The readers are thirsty for writing with personality, for writing with an opinion, with a stance to take, and maybe some color. If you, as an editor, are just systematically taking that out of anything that you're going to run, you're doing a disservice to your readers and to your periodical. And so when I go to a writer like this, I'm always hoping not only that they were in a good mood when they wrote the piece, because that way you'll get more delightful stuff, but also that they have an editor who understands that and who will let it run. And that happened here. This is how the piece ends. We're talking here not just about Nosferatu, but about Dracula itself. And then the last paragraph is delightful. It's absolutely delightful. Oh no, let me read you a little bit more, because Francis Ford Coppola in his movie adds a backstory origin to Dracula. Where can we go here? Let's do 2 paragraphs. Bram Stoker's Dracula, which is the name of Coppola's movie, was not an influential film, except perhaps on Johnny Depp, who took one of Oldman's looks as his template for a couple of decades. The uncomputerized special effects, though, are often wonderful. A transition from puncture marks on the neck, for instance, to the eyes of a wolf. I don't know how many of you have seen Coppola's Dracula movie, but it has to be seen to be believed. James Hart's screenplay even comes up with an ingenious backstory for the Count. Hundreds of years ago, he fought for Christianity. But when his wife committed suicide, mistakenly thinking he had been killed in battle, so that she was denied a Christian burial, he turned against God. Now he sees in Mina, the reincarnation of his lost love. And that's what you see in Coppola's Dracula movie. You see that the same actress plays the 2 figures, Dracula's dead wife and Mina Harker. It's what's her name? I'm completely blanking on the name of the actress. She's famous. You would know her. But I want to say Winona Ryder, but I don't think that's right. Oh, I don't know. But one way or another, the same actress plays both. And so it underscores the fact that Gary Oldman's Dracula is fascinated with her because she looks just like his dead wife. And then Adam Mars Jones goes on for this final paragraph. In the final scene of the movie, that is, Mina shows some tenderness towards him as if this might actually be true. It is without any animosity, and with his consent, that she runs him through with a sword, so that he reverts stage by stage from the wizened creature before her to the glorious young man he once was. Then she beheads him. But perhaps in a deleted scene no one has ever seen, she asks before she does so, "Count Dracula, my friend, you've explained your recent actions. I mean, since you recognize me as your long-lost Elisabetta come to life. But why did you set out from Transylvania in the first place, with all those coffins? Since you seem to have made no attempt to make new vampires, and it's not clear how you'd do that anyway. I mean, don't you just see human beings as food? Though on the whole, apart from killing poor dear Lucy, I have to say you've been very nice to me." He imagines a deleted scene in which the character says that, and the scene goes on, and Dracula croaks something from out his shriveled face, pushing air through his bloodless lips, but so weakly that she must lean forward and ask him to repeat it. This time she can just make it out, reeling from the carrion breath of the devourer of souls. What is Dracula's answer? "Because otherwise there would have been no story, my darling." That is just awesome. That is just amazing. And I realize I'm venting a private frustration here, but nevertheless, I can easily picture a 2022 editor saying, "I don't know, look, Adam, baby, boy chick, I don't know what you're doing in that last paragraph. It's got to go. Nobody's gonna like that. What are you doing? I just stick to telling me about the movie. Some sort of movie. Just stick to telling me about it. What happens next? Well, what's this business at the end, though?" In 2022, to put it mildly, I can now easily picture an editor who would say, "Take that out." And that's gold. It's absolutely genius. So I am very happy that at least for this review, in at least this one journal, at least this one time, Adam Morris Jones didn't have to deal with that kind of editor. It reminded me of a little picture that went around social media, a few scenes from the wretched Peter Jackson Hobbit trilogy. I don't know how many of you have suffered through that, but Peter Jackson has an interracial love story between a super hottie dwarf and an elf maiden that he has made up for the movie, and the dwarf eventually dies, and she's miserable about it, and somebody made a visual. I wish I could show it up here. I don't have the technical skill. Somebody made a visual that chopped up little freezes, little stills from that sequence, where the elf maiden Toriel is saying to her king, Thranduil, "Why does this hurt so much?" In the movie, she asks, "Why does this hurt so much?" Because she's immortal. She's an immortal being and has never lost anyone she's loved before. But in the still, she asks Thranduil, "Why does this hurt so much?" And his response to her in another panel is, "Because it's not in the books." It reminded me a little bit of that. But anyway, now that we're done with the periodicals, we will go through the books. We have two packages here. Neither one is a violation of rule number 1 because these are both clearly from publishers. So let's see what this first one is. Oh, fantastic. Okay. This comes out in late June. And a lot of you, I think, are probably going to recognize the author's name. And I bet you'll recognize it from the same place that I do. This is a novel coming out in June called Aurora by David Cope. And the reason that you'll know this author's name is because he wrote a novel called Cold Storage. Last year? The year before that? Had a really striking cover, something similar to this, lots and lots of dark space on the cover. Cold Storage was terrific. Really, really enjoyable science fiction adventure. So, I always talk on this channel about how good your credit is in the Bank of Steve, right? I had never read anything by this author before that book. For all I know, Cold Storage was his debut. I've read one book by him, and it was terrific. I loved it. So his bank credit could not be higher. So what have we got here? In Aurora, Illinois, it's Aurora, Ohio is a real place. Aubrey Wheeler is just trying to get by after her semi-criminal ex-husband split, leaving behind his unruly teenage son. Then the lights go out, not just in Aurora, but across the globe. A solar storm has knocked out power almost everywhere. Suddenly, all problems are local, very local, and Aubrey must assume the mantle of fierce protector of her suburban neighborhood. Okay, why would she do that? Why would she assume that mantle? Why would she be allowed to? I will be curious to know. Like I said, this author's credit in the Bank of Steve could not be higher. But if the reason she's allowed to assume the role of fierce protector of her suburban neighborhood is because she's a woman, and not for any other reason, does she have the largest store of medical supplies? Does she have the largest store of prepper-style imperishable foods? Does she have the largest store of weapons? If those are the reasons, fine. If it's just because, listen to the women, then then no thanks. But we shall see. Let's see here. Across the country lives Aubrey's estranged brother Tom, a fantastically wealthy, neurotically overprepared Silicon Valley CEO. He plans to ride out the crisis in a gilded desert bunker he built for maximum comfort and security. But the complicated history between the siblings is far from over, and what feels like the end of the world is just the beginning of several long overdue reckonings that not everyone will survive. Okay. All right, great. Well, that touches on a lot of subjects that I know really well. So once again, as we saw with that novel Full, we saw a novel called Full. Was that yesterday? It all blurs together. Well, recently we saw a novel, in fact, that I'm going to review for the Vineyard Gazette called Full, which stars a social media influencer. Now, I am not a social media influencer, but I am a social media figure. I have made more videos than anyone on the YouTube platform, any one individual person who's not corporately sponsored on YouTube. I've certainly made more book-related content than anyone in the world. And I'm in front of you on your big screen plasma screen TV every day. So I know about that world. If the author of that book does not know about that world, she would have had to research it. And I will be able to know when I read her book, which I'm ashamed to say I have not started yet, I will be able to know right away how good that research is. And the same thing is true with this book on two fronts. Because the thing that causes the power to go out in Aurora, Illinois, and all over the world is a gigantic solar flare. And I have researched those too fairly well. I've researched they have a proper name, they have a proper set of likelihoods, and they have degrees of bad. And the worst ones are very, very bad. A massive coronal ejection, if it struck the Earth directly, would return human civilization to the Dark Ages. And human civilization would only get back to normal after a very long time. It wouldn't look anything like it did when the lights went out. It would be long enough so that all kinds of restructurings would happen. No institutional momentum would carry over. 9, 10, 11 months, 20 months, no institutional momentum would carry over. And by institutional momentum, I mean states, governments, power structures. None of that would carry over. It would start to reform. Now, those massive coronal ejections that are, some of them are as big as the planet Jupiter, and they're flaring off from the sun all the time. And you might think, okay, then why hasn't it happened yet? It has happened. We've been hit by several of them. But you might think, well, surely it's going to happen again tomorrow or something like that. And the reason why that's not true is because most people, unless you've read up on popular astronomy, have a yen for it like I do, most people have absolutely no conception of how big the sun is compared to the Earth, how big the sun is. It could fire these things off all day long, and random chance would still protect the Earth. But I also know about those high-tech gilded bunkers and all the lower versions of them. I know the bug out, stuff hits the fan havens that the ultra rich have made everywhere. If you ever read a newspaper interview or a profile with somebody who has $100 million or more, $10 million or more, $5 million or more, if you ever read a profile like that, first of all, the profile writer is not doing you justice. They're not doing a good job for you if they don't ask the person about their own shelter, because they absolutely have one. They absolutely do. A lot of figures have more than one. Some of them have urban examples of this, and also deeply rural examples of bug-out shelters like this. One person that I know personally has a gilded bunker like this Silicon Valley CEO that is pretty elaborate, and it is extensively stocked with water, food, power supply, all that sort of thing. Still a dicey thing. If the ground immediately above this structure were badly radioactive, I don't think you'd be protected inside even the best of these bunkers. I don't think you would be, because your waste has to go somewhere. There has to be some sort of communication with the outside world somehow. And that's a two-way street, always. But I know someone who has one of those and was thinking about it back when he had only a few $1,000,000 to spend. He kept thinking about that place, and he kept thinking, well, okay, but I live and I work and I do business in, I don't want to say ground zero, but target zero. In other words, if there's a full-scale nuclear exchange, I won't have time to get to that shelter. I won't have the ability to do it. So I need one here as well. I need a second shelter here so that if something is foreseeable, like, for instance, I don't know, an asteroid the size of Manhattan that's headed for Earth, then I would have time. I would have time to get out of the city and get to my fully stocked shelter. But if there's very little time, almost no time, like 17-minute warning, then I need a shelter here. I know people who have both. Believe it or not, you might think, well, how on earth could you have one of those things in a city like New York or Beijing? You can. With money, all things are possible. So I will know, too, of the stuff that David Cope had to research for this book. Assuming he had to research both those things. I don't imagine that there'll be big elements, right? It sounds like the interfamily squabble, the struggle for survival. It sounds like that will be the big plot of the book. But I will know, one way or another, I will know how good the research is here. And that's interesting. Because I usually don't. Usually, like I said the other day, usually I am researching right along with the author. But anyway, let's wrap this thing up. This mail haul's going on. let's do this last book and then we'll be done. Okay, this last book is a finished copy of something that we have seen already. The finished copy comes out in late April. So this is an April finished copy, which is very good. This is Tove Ditlevsen. This is The Trouble with Happiness. So this one is a newly married woman longs irrationally for a silk umbrella. A husband chases away his wife's beloved cat. A betrayed mother impulsively sacks her housekeeper. Underneath the surface of these precisely observed tales of marriage and family, in mid-century Copenhagen, pulse currents of desire, violence, and despair as women and men struggle to escape from the roles assigned to them and dream of becoming free and happy without ever truly understanding what that might mean. And these are translated from the Danish, these stories are translated from the Danish by Michael Favola Goldman. This comes out in 3 weeks, and I confess I haven't got to it. I have, there's another one too, there's a companion volume to this that if I'm getting the finished copy of this, I will get the companion volume any day. This author has been undergoing a little bit of a renaissance in terms of reprinting new translations. Nothing that I've read has really pleased me, but I haven't tried this, so we'll give it a try. So it's all fiction. The mail haul is all fiction. It's an EMP, a massive EMP, and The Trouble with Happiness. Great, fantastic. So the David Cope novel doesn't come out until late June, so it's not on the docket. The Trouble with Happiness, I could probably read tonight. I could probably stand to do that. I mean, it won't take 40 minutes to do. So, but anyway, that's quite enough of a mail haul. So I will wrap this up, but I will be back. Thank you, BookTube.